Hello, my name is Dave Wallace. I'm a professor at the Naval Academy, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about motivation and how we should look at motivation in a leadership context. To begin with, I'm going to talk about how motivation works as a process at the individual level, and then that will turn that into a discussion about how leaders can influence the motivation of their followers. The first piece that we need to look at, though, is what is motivation? We often talk about someone is motivated, as if one can be motivated or not motivated. And I want to change that idea just a little bit. And I want us to understand motivation as less about whether or not someone is or is not motivated or how much they're motivated, but about what motivates them and where they choose to spend that motivation. The idea here is to look at motivation as in what we call the resource model. The idea that we all have resources, and those resources are limited. Resources like time, like energy, like attention, like money. Where we choose to spend those resources is indicative of what our motivation is. And so I want to get this idea that it's not about being motivated or not being motivated. It's a question of, for what are we motivated? We have, as this illustration suggests, this illustration from Camphor and Ackerman, 1989, a certain amount of resources. Now, a number of resources we have are going to be based on external factors. We might think of these in different ways. So we might have a certain amount of money in our pocket or a certain amount of budget. That is certainly a resource. We might also have a certain amount of intelligence, a certain amount of attentional capability. These will be driven by our cognitive abilities. And there are other examples as well. But ultimately, we have some sort of limited resource, and we need to make decisions about where to spend that resource. And the idea is that we have internally to us, implicitly often, some sort of allocation policy. We allocate resources in a number of different ways. For the leader's purpose, the question is, are people spending their resources, their attentional resources, on things that are, quote, on task or things that are off task? So am I working on my homework or am I surfing Facebook or Snapchat? One is obviously on task from a teacher's perspective. One is off task. And the question is, where is the student or where is this follower spending their attention? Is it on task activities or off task activities? This also suggests that there is a little bit of self-regulation going on, and so some attentional capabilities in particular are going to be spent on self-regulation, such as goal setting. But the idea here is that we have some sort of finite set, limited set of capacities, and we determine ourselves where we spend those capacities. That's what motivation is all about. Now, you've probably seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the idea that there is a pyramid of needs that drive our motivation. This is actually an overly complex model. Now, I say that, but you're going to see an even more complex model coming up. But what we've found is it's not really this hierarchy of needs. We can more simplistically look at this and say there's kind of two levels here. There are basic needs, safety and physiological needs, and there are social needs. Our basic needs do need to be met. We need food, shelter, water in order to move on to our sociological needs. Maslow suggested that we don't worry about morality, creativity, spontaneity, etc. if we also don't have self-esteem, friendship, or sexual intimacy. We know this to be not exactly correct. It turns out that as long as our basic needs are taken care of, these more higher level needs don't fall into a hierarchy. We are free to pursue any one of those. But if we think about it from an attentional capacity point of view, if we don't have enough food, shelter, and water, we are spending all of our attentional capacity or all of our other resources on trying to get food, shelter, and water, make sure our family is safe and taken care of. Once those needs are met, then we are more free to follow our heart in terms of creativity, in terms of engagement, in terms of building ourselves and helping other people. So really it's about meeting these basic needs in order to move on to our more social needs. Another way to look at this is what's called the core social motives. Social psychologists talk about these 5 core social motives that operate across all cultures to really drive how people operate. People have a need to belong. They have a need to understand and control the world around them. They have a need to feel good about themselves, and they have a need to trust other people. Each of these different things tends to drive our behaviors and our cognitions about others. Because they're driving our behaviors, we also talk about them in terms of their motivational ability. So this is really the core psychology around our core motivation. But of course, it goes a little bit beyond this. So let's start here. We have our needs and we have our personality and values. Now, our personality is really a description of our motivational consistency. Some people are what we call extroverts. They really like to be gregarious. They really like to be social. They really like to interact with other people on a regular basis. They do this consistently. This suggests a consistency of motivation over time. And those consistencies in terms of someone's preferences for behaviors and where they're spending their time and resources and attentional capacities, we start to say, well, those consistencies we can track and we can call those personality. So our personality is going to be our first driver of our motivations and our desire to do things. Values also play a role here. Now, our values can be thought of as trans-situational goals. Goals that supersede the situation that are in, that are core to us, our core moral idea and our core code that describes our values. These are actually a little bit more malleable than personality, and they're acquired through thought and also through experience and over time. So ultimately, at our core, our behavioral motivations start with our needs and also our personality and our values. Now, I talked about the choice in motivation and how motivation is about a choice of behaviors and where we're going to spend our time. So this presents the beginning of our model towards understanding how motivation and behaviors work together. Look, here's the idea. We all make choices. Our choices are our own, and only we can choose what we're going to spend our own attentional resources on. I know a lot of people talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and the talk around that tends to get to the idea that there are two different things going on there. And what I'm going to suggest here is that they're not. That, in my opinion, there's no such thing as extrinsic motivation. I choose my own path. I am intrinsically motivated. Now, an extrinsic motivation is when someone else tries to influence what I'm motivated to do and tries to influence my internal choices. We'll talk a little bit more about this later when we talk about the leader's influence on this. But I want to get this idea of, I really want to get rid of this idea of these two dual systems going on. Really, it's about people making their own individual choices about what they're going to allocate their resources towards. And so I prefer to think of it as all intrinsic, and people are trying to make some sort of extrinsic push on your intrinsic motivation. I also want to talk, because I haven't talked about it yet, the idea of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is our belief in ourself, our belief in our ability to do a task. We can certainly have a generalized self-efficacy, I can do anything, and we also can have a very specific self-efficacy. I have a high self-efficacy for cooking dinner. I have a very low self-efficacy for playing football. I don't think I do a very good job. And it turns out I don't play a lot of football as a result. Whereas I am likely to try and cook dinner or try and do things as a result of having self-confidence that I can do those things. Our self-efficacy will drive our behavior, and here's how. We make a decision, an evaluation wherein we are given a choice. When we're given a choice about where to spend our resources, we go through an evaluative process. We call this process VIE, and this comes from something called expectancy theory thought up by Vroom in 1964. And the idea is that our choices are based around valence, instrumentality, and expectancy. So here's how this works. Valence is, do I value a certain outcome? Is there something I want at the end of this that's really important to me, that I'm going to get out of all of this? Instrumentality is about, will succeeding at this task bring about that outcome? So maybe I really want to get paid a lot. I really want to be rich in life. So I put a high valence on future income. And then my instrumentality decision is, will doing this task lead to future income? If it doesn't, I might not be interested. But if it does, that's certainly going to up my desire to spend some time here. And then the third evaluation we make is expectancy. Can I succeed in this task? Now you see where self-efficacy plays a role here. Will I succeed at this task? So for instance, one example would be a test. The balance question is, do I value getting a good grade in this class? The instrumentality question is, will passing this test lead to a good grade in this class? And then the expectancy question is, can I pass this test? So once we've made an evaluation, we go through this VIE, this balance, expectancy, and instrumentality process. We make a choice about where we're going to spend our time, where we're going to spend our resources and allocate our attention. We talk about this in terms of goals. Now, when I say this, it doesn't mean that we write down all our goals. In the best case, we do, but oftentimes they're implicit goals. So even the goals we write down might not be the goals that our monkey brains tell us to go do. The reality is that we're going to set implicit goals based on these evaluations. Let me say all of that again, because I didn't like that. All right. Once we make this determination, this evaluation of the choices that we have through a balance, instrumentality, and expectancy decision-making process, and oh, by the way, I should add to this that this process is a multiplicative process, not an additive one. This means if any one of these three things go to zero, if I don't value the outcome, if I don't believe this task is going to get me to a valued outcome, or if I don't believe I can succeed at this task, then I am not going to want to spend my resources on this task. So after I make this evaluation, I'm going to go through some implicit goal setting. I'm going to make a determination about where to spend my resources. So I make the evaluation and then I make the choice. And then this leads ultimately to behavior. What we externally, when we watch someone, we can talk about their goal striving. So here's a thing that I have learned with my PhD in psychology. There's not a lot of truths that we know for sure, but let me tell you this one. You cannot read minds. I cannot tell just by looking at someone or even knowing someone, sometimes even asking someone what their motivations are. I just don't know. I don't have that ability to read minds. What I can do though is I can look at their behaviors. I can look at how their motivation is manifested in their actions and how they spend resources. I can look at the direction in which they spend resources, the intensity in which they apply resources, which is really about the proportion of resources they put towards a thing, and I can look for their persistence over time in following that particular goal choice. These things give me the idea, these are the observable things that I can see about someone's motivations, because it will manifest itself in the way they spend their time. When we talk about direction, we're saying, are they going towards the task we want or that off-task activity? When we talk about intensity, how much of their attention are they paying on this particular task? And then persistence, how long do they stick with it, particularly in the face of challenge? So this is our beginning point. People have needs, they have personalities and values that are going to drive their evaluation of particular behavioral choices. Once they make an evaluation based on balance, instrumentality, and expectancy, they're going to make a choice about where to expend their resources, and then they're going to expend those resources. This is where we get to observe someone's motivation. Ultimately, this leads to performance. When we talk about performance, we're talking in particular about job performance. When we talk about performance, we're talking about it as being a function of someone's ability, someone's motivation, and the situation. So you might have all the ability in the world, but if you're not motivated to spend that ability on the task at hand, you're not going to get high performance. You might have all the motivation in the world, but if you don't have the ability to complete a task, that's going to be a problem. And of course, the situation has an influence here as well. All else being equal. In other words, in the short term, we don't do training, we don't do development. Someone in the short term, their ability doesn't change, and the situation is held constant. then motivation is the only thing that's going to change someone's performance. And increasing motivation, increasing the amount of resources that they have, that they are willing and able to, or willing to spend on the task at hand, is going to have a change in their performance. Their performance then leads to what their job satisfaction is. When someone performs well, they have a higher job satisfaction. When someone performs poorly, they have a lower job satisfaction. You'll note that there's also an arrow here to self-efficacy. When I perform well, I become more self-efficacious and I make better expectancy decisions when I'm choosing to spend more resources on that task. When I perform poorly, the opposite happens. I do want to point out here that the direction of causality between job satisfaction and performance is that performance leads to job satisfaction. Now, hold that thought because it's really a little bit more reciprocal than that. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next slides. But I want to get this idea that the better I do at work, the happier I will be at work, and the more satisfied I will be with my own performance. Now, there is also one additional line here. Personality has a role to play in job satisfaction. Some people just love to work. Some people just love doing the things that they are doing. And so that may be over and above whatever their performance will be. Holding that constant, though, performance drives job satisfaction. Job satisfaction, in turn, drives two additional ideas. One is someone's organizational commitment and their willingness to work on behalf of the leader. What's important here is that these things, their willingness to work on behalf of the leader and their organizational commitment, will drive back to their goal choices. They're going to have a higher valence. They're going to be more interested in doing things that the leader and that the organization is asking them to do when they have higher job satisfaction, which then leads to better commitment to those leaders, changes their valence. This is how job satisfaction leads to higher performance, through this engagement process. You can see how this can be a really virtuous cycle if we can get it going. Okay, so now I want to talk about how leaders influence motivation. What leaders can do to try and influence the process that I've been talking about here to try to get better performance. Like I said, in the short term, performance is, well, even in the long term, performance is a function of ability, motivation, and the situation. In the short term, if I hold ability and the situation constant, it's about motivation. And leaders play an outsized role in motivating their followers. So let's start here. There's not a lot to do here. This is an internal process. Remember, I talked about intrinsic motivation, that the idea is that I'm doing all this stuff, the evaluations and then the goal choices and the goal striving, I'm doing on my own. No amount of leader influence is going to change these directly, but we can talk about how we might change these indirectly. Let's start at the left side of the model. Needs. The important thing here is to get basic needs off the table. Study after study shows that if you pay someone enough so that they don't have to worry about where they're going to get their next meal from, whether or not their family's going to get taken care of, whether or not they're going to have food, shelter, and water, then additional pay over that has a minimal, I won't say zero because that's not true either, but it's asymptotic. It has a minimal effect over time on someone's motivation. The key here is get physiological and security needs off the table. Make sure that's taken care of. That's going to drive motivation. If someone doesn't have those needs met, they are going to spend their attentional resources on trying to meet those needs, which means that they're not going to spend it on what the leader wants them to spend it on at work. Personality and values here, not a lot we can do with personality. We can influence values. Organizational climate and culture will, over the long term, have an effect on people's values as they bring them to be aligned together. People have a desire to work in organizations in which there's congruence between their personal values and the organization's values. So over time, people will actually change their personal values to be more in line with the organization's. So one of the things that we can do here is develop an organizational climate and culture that engenders the types of values we're looking for. People who value hard work, as an example, are more willing to work hard. And so we can bring that in over time. So certainly take the basic needs off the table and try to influence the values, but this is a long-term process. We can have a great deal of effect here on balance, instrumentality, and expectancy. This is where when people talk about extrinsic motivation, this is usually what they're talking about. Providing incentives. When we provide someone an incentive, we're really talking about their valence decision and trying to add more value to their outcome. This is what makes incentives work. Now, overall, incentives tend to be pretty weak. They can work, and we can get people to have higher performance and to have more interest in putting their attentional resources towards what we want them to work on if we give them a higher valence. The reality is the better place that incentives play for us is in giving someone direction. If we understand incentives as a communication tool, this is where we tell people, this is what I want you to work on. That is a more powerful influencer than the incentive itself in terms of monetary or other gain. So we can use incentives, but they tend to be weak other than as a directional communication. We can also build someone's self-efficacy. When we set challenging goals over time, we can actually build someone's self-efficacy. When we're very clear about our expectations, people are more likely to do the things that we're asking them to do because they believe they can achieve them. When we are very vague about our expectations, people start to doubt whether or not they're going to be able to meet our vague expectations, and so that's going to have an effect here. We can also build self-efficacy by what we ask people to do. If we challenge people, if we try to push them a little bit, we're often communicating that we believe in them, that we believe they can do more. And again, when people believe they can do more, they're more willing to do more. If, on the other hand, we don't challenge people, if we take a step back, particularly if we tell them that they're maybe not as capable as they think they are, this can actually have a negative effect on self-efficacy, which over time will bring down their motivation. So we talked about how we can affect their decisions about what to do. Let's talk about their performance. Can we affect their performance separately from motivation? And the answer is yes, we can. We can talk about feedback. Feedback gives people knowledge of results so that they understand what their goals are and what they're striving to perform. Again, this gives us a directional idea so that people understand they might be really interested in staying on task, really interested in doing the things that we want them to do, very motivated to work for us, but they might not be spending their resources in the right way, at least from our point of view. And so feedback can help get people back on path. Now, feedback must be specific and goal related. It can't just be general, you're a great person, you're a great employee, or you're a lousy employee. That type of feedback actually does not change performance. But we might be able to change performance with a little bit of direction and very specific, behaviorally focused feedback. So we can have a direct effect on performance in this model. We can also have a direct effect on job satisfaction. We can build up, separately from performance, we can build up someone's job satisfaction. When we give people autonomy, when we give them a number of different things to work on instead of always working on the same widget over and over again, when we give them a sense of task significance, that what they're working on is important, that they understand what the final product is that they're working towards, and they actually have the chance to complete the product that they're working on or the project that they're working on, these things will give them an idea that their task is important and that their work is significant. In addition, if we give people the job resources they need to complete the job, all of these things, their autonomy, skill variety, their sense of significance, and having the available resources are going to increase job satisfaction even separately from their performance. We can also have a direct effect as leaders on organizational commitment. For instance, when an organizational mission aligns with personal values, people are more committed to that organization. We do this through organizational policies and procedures. We treat people with dignity and respect. We have policies and rewards that fairly distribute our rewards over time, and we do that through transparent rules. When we do those things together, people will be more committed to the organization. And finally, we can have a direct effect on people's willingness to work on behalf of the leader. When you hear words like transformational leadership, servant leadership, ethical leadership, authentic leadership, these are the idea of trying to build up a person as being respected, building the leader as being respected, so that others will want to work for her. The individual consideration behavior, when leaders, quote unquote, take care of their followers or are seen to take care of their followers, then followers start to build an identity with the leader. They start to trust the leader. Then they get a commitment to the leader's goals, more than just compliance, that they really want to go all out and achieve what the leader wants to achieve. So these are all different places where we can have a direct effect. We can affect here the willingness to work on behalf of the leader. We can affect the organizational commitment. We can directly affect job satisfaction, and we can directly affect performance. Through this return arrow, this then affects someone's goal choice and affects their motivation. Okay, some final thoughts on how leaders influence motivation. And this is some specific advice. 1, set a culture or climate that aligns values with the mission. Promote personal dignity and promote a focus on accountability and performance. Promote a workplace where people want to work hard. Now, we can provide incentives, and my advice would be, don't discard incentives as a motivational process. Incentives can be valuable, particularly in terms of directing people toward what your priorities are. Now, those incentives help explain and help communicate those consequences of effective and ineffective performance. That's where they really come to play. They tend to have less effect in terms of motivating someone through the reward itself. We want to make sure that we provide resources. Part of a leader's job is to remove any obstacles that are in the way of their followers being able to do their job. There are some theories of leadership. There's one particularly called McGrath, 1964, called the functional theory of leadership, which just suggests that the job of a leader is to remove obstacles from people trying to do their job. That's an important idea. Us providing the resources as leaders, us giving them all the things that they can do their job is going to help with motivation. We can influence the work characteristics themselves, providing autonomy, providing skill variety, providing task significance. It's also really important that we provide job clarity and role clarity. We want to talk to our people about what it is that we're expecting them to do. Again, this is where the incentives actually come in and are useful. We want to make sure they understand what the assignments are, provide them feedback on it, help them through the planning process, help set goals and expectations so that people understand what they're striving towards. And finally, we can do a little bit of influence work on people's identities. And this is about taking people's individual considerations into mind in our leader behaviors so that people are more willing to do things on our behalf as leaders and move forward. All of these things come together to give us this idea of motivation. And again, recall back from the beginning, motivation is how we spend our resources. I can't tell someone's motivation by reading their mind, but I can see it by how they spend their time and where they spend their resources. And I can have an influence, maybe not directly, but through a number of different actions that I take, I can have an influence on how people are going to be motivated in the job, which then will lead to higher performance for them and higher performance for the organization.